Tension is rising in South Sudan after the vice president was put under house arrest. Riek Machar stands accused of involvement in recent battles with the military. Now there are fears the 2018 power-sharing agreement is collapsing. So could this all lead to another civil war? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Cyril Vanier. The world's youngest country, South Sudan, is on the brink of another civil war. That's the warning from the United Nations after weeks of escalating violence. At the core of it all are rising tensions between the President Salva Kiir and his Vice President Riek Machar. The VP's arrest has made things worse. His party says the 2018 peace deal that ended years of fighting has now collapsed. That could very well lead to more fighting between government forces and armed groups. And in a country that's still recovering from years of civil war, that's raising alarms in and out of South Sudan. So can the rival parties overcome political mistrust? What role are ethnic divisions playing in all of this? We'll explore these issues with our guests in just a moment. First, though, this report from Katia Lopez-Horayan.
Shortly after South Sudan's Vice President Riek Machar was placed under house arrest by government leaders, his party issued a warning. The 2018 peace deal that ended years of civil war between the rivals is now invalid. South Sudan's President Salva Kiir and VP Machar have been both allies and adversaries. Now they're at odds again, with a long-standing power struggle unraveling in the world's youngest nation.
The peacekeeping mission is once again urging the President and the Vice President to resolve their grievances, to end the military confrontation and uphold the revitalized peace agreement.
A power-sharing deal between Kiir and Machar has not worked. The tension now fueling weeks of fighting between government forces loyal to the president and armed groups, including members of the so-called White Army siding with the VP. Both sides accuse each other of starting the fight.
What you have seen since the 4th of March is an escalation, really, in this conflict between what are supposedly supposed to be forces on the same side. And that's now falling apart.
In the capital, Juba, and across the country, people are dreading the threat of yet another civil war.
I strongly oppose war. I want to protect myself and my family. I pray day and night. I don't want another war.
More than 400,000 people were killed in South Sudan between 2013 and 2018. The army split across ethnic lines, and fighting in the oil-rich nation displaced entire communities. The scars of war are still etched in people's minds. Now the UN is calling on South Sudan's leaders to show restraint, de-escalate, and avoid another civil war. Katia Lopez-Horayan, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests now. In Juba, Patrick Oyet, a journalist based in South Sudan. In Nairobi, Daniel Akech, senior analyst for South Sudan at the International Crisis Group. And in Washington, D.C., Abdullahi Halakhe, a Horn of Africa security analyst and senior advocate at Refugees International. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to start with you, Patrick. After the first Vice President Riek Machar was placed under house arrest, you're in Juba, of course, you're in the South Sudanese capital. You tweeted, "Anything is possible in our situation now." What did you mean by that?
Well, because we've been here before. We have seen tensions leading to violence, tensions leading to armed conflict. So when information started coming in that Vice President Riek Machar was being arrested, he was being put under house arrest, therefore, many of the people in South Sudan became very afraid because we've seen this happen in 2013, we've seen this happen in 2016. It starts with a disagreement among political leaders and then it goes to armed conflict. So everybody in this country is worried. We've talked to a lot of people and everybody is worried and everybody actually does not want to go to war. But the leaders have other ideas and they continue to disagree. This is why I made that tweet.
Daniel, this is the youngest country in the world. It's not even 14 years old yet 5 years of this country's existence have already been spent in civil war. When you look at the political situation right now, knowing what the last civil war meant, 400,000 people killed, when you look at today's situation, do you see the ingredients for another civil war there?
Yes, the signs are very clear. The escalations has been sustained throughout since they started when a militia group overran a garrison town in Nasir. We have been seeing escalations after escalations, and we were expecting that the political leaders, the President Salva Kiir and Vice President Riek Machar, who came together into a coalition government in 2020, would actually de-escalate the situations, but now they are arresting each other. Also, this could be a very different type of violence that we could see. It would be a very decentralized violence because there are other groups that are not affiliated with Machar that have taken up arms against the government, as well as the community violence that has been simmering during the implementation of the peace agreements, which was not actually working out very well. So this could be really bad. And South Sudan is in a terrible shape because it has not recovered from its previous civil war from 2013 to 2018.
Abdullahi, here's a list of recent moves by the president, by Salva Kiir, since the beginning of the year. He arrested ministers and high-ranking military officers close to his rival, Riek Machar. He replaced a vice president with one of his own close advisors. He invited, although the government denies this, Ugandan troops into the capital, presumably to help secure him. And finally, he placed the leader of the opposition, none other than the first vice president, we've mentioned his name several times, Riek Machar, under house arrest. All of this just in the last few weeks. What has been the trigger for all of this?
I think the trigger is the current president is not secure to the extent that he is not even trusting his own military. This is now the third time Ugandans are going in to secure his administration, particularly in Juba, tells you everything that you need to know. If he is secure, he wouldn't be making any of this. Just one thing that I really would want to make very clear is the international community and South Sudanese in particular are tired of these machinations by the political elite. Elections already have been postponed twice in South Sudan. Now, these are also potential triggers for postponing these elections again so that Salva Kiir and the people around him can perpetuate themselves into leadership position for foreseeable future. But the thing that is really different this time around is the entire region is on the edge. You've seen the conflict in Sudan, getting into Sudan. You've seen tension between Eritrea and Ethiopia. So all this makes it really, really difficult if you consider the international scene where the United States, that is the largest humanitarian donor, pulling back countries like South Sudan, or refugees and IDPs are already under tremendous pressure. And it's not just the vacuuming out of the aid, it is also the political, diplomatic weight that comes with it. This could be really, really dangerous for South Sudan and the region.
You said the president feels insecure. Why would that be?
Yeah, you see the two men, both President Salva Kiir and Vice President Riek Machar, have been in power for 20 years, by the way, because they came into power in 2005 and they are in power up to now. Of course, you could put some time off that because there was a time when there was civil war, but they have been in power together. But the biggest problem is that these two people do not trust each other. That's why we're having a lot of challenges. Because if these two people trusted one another, for example, the 2018 peace agreement is very clear. Even before the formation of the government, the unity government in 2020, the forces were supposed to be unified. But because the two people do not trust each other, everybody was not willing to really give their real forces to be reunified, to be retrained and redeployed. And when you see people talk of things are not being implemented, whether it is the other parts of the agreement, the bodies that are supposed to head, the country towards election, these are coming from lack of political will, which is coming because of lack of trust between the two men, and even the security arrangement is not properly done because of lack of trust. Everybody wants to keep their forces so that in case there's a disagreement, they can use forces, but also they use the forces as a means of negotiating. And this is what is keeping the people of South Sudan all the time at the edge where we are living between war and peace.
Daniel, explain for our viewers the rivalry between the two men, because so much, as Patrick explained, centers around that. The rivalry that's been going on, as far as I can tell, at least 3 decades, right? At least since the 90s. Direct or indirect rivalry since Salva Kiir, who is now president, and Riek Machar, who is first vice president.
Yeah, sure. The two leaders were part of the leadership of the Southern rebel movement that fought against the Khartoum government in the 80s and 90s. By the beginning of 1991, late 1991, Machar fell out with the then leader of the SPLM, which was the Southern rebel movement at the time. And Kiir stayed on the side of the SPLM leader, John Garang. And both sides clashed. That was the first instance in which Kiir and Machar fought on opposite sides. And then when the agreement led to the independence of South Sudan in 2011, both of them found themselves in the same government, but their working relationship started to grew bad because Machar began to realize that he began to talk of Kiir having some kind of dictatorship tendencies, and Kiir was seeing Machar as undermining his governance, his rule. And in 2013, 2 years after independence, they went into war. And that war came to a stop in 2018, and then they formed this government in which they are now stuck, unable to actually move key provisions of that agreement. This agreement was meant to actually separate violence from politics, and now we are seeing that is. Politics and violence are now intertwined once more. And so it has been a very difficult relationship where they are not able to actually implement the agreements, and they could not get out of it because of some fears of losing control. So they have been stuck with it. But what actually led to them not what we are seeing now was the war in Sudan has had huge impacts on implementation of this agreement, which was held together by oil petrodollars that were flowing from the oil fields that were relying on transportation to Sudan. So this has contributed to what we are seeing today, that the disruption of oil flow has made it difficult for the president to have control over a large security sector. He has not been able to pay organized forces, and this has contributed to what we are seeing now, a stress external pressure that is pressuring the president to make the kind of moves he is making, as we have seen.
All right, so there is to some extent a knock-on effect of the fighting that has gripped Sudan, South Sudan's northern neighbor, for almost 2 years now. Abdullahi, is the rivalry between Machar and Kiir, is it the symptom or the cause? Like, do you think the fact that these two men have been on and off fighting for leadership of the SPLM, then fighting for leadership of South Sudan, is that what caused the civil war and what could cause another round of fighting in South Sudan? Or do you think that's just a symptom of wider forces that are antagonistic within the country?
At individual level, I think it is they don't get along very well, and that is putting it very charitably. But then again, this is by this stage, South Sudan should go beyond the two individuals, because if the institution, the reasons why you have institutions, the reasons why all these peace agreements have got certain timelines for the establishments of the institutions is to guard, is to provide a pressure valve for these kind of tendencies. People don't need to like each other in order to work with each other, because the vice president deeply despises the president, but that is not the point for them to go to war every second when things don't go their way. But to my mind, even if the two gentlemen are not in the scene, South Sudan is incredibly vulnerable. And so they are being held, the Sudanese or South Sudanese are being held hostage by the utter paranoia of these guys. Like my gentleman who said at the top that the military or the military groups that both of these guys have was initially meant to form one unified South Sudan military. But both of them knows that once that happens, they do not have a leverage, A, to protect themselves, two, but also they will be very exposed. So they want this to continue. But the question is, for how long can this continue? South Sudanese did not fight for that very long against the Sudanese up in the north. For them now to be tied into these rounds of violence every couple of years when the supposed election has to be held, because this is the second time elections have been postponed already since the signing of the peace agreement, and we are in the books for another third round. That means we are just stuck in a transition fatigue that needs to stop.
By the way, just letting all of you know, as of the time that we record this discussion, I've just been given the information that forces loyal to the first Vice President, Riek Machar, have attacked the South Sudanese military, a South Sudanese military post in Juba. That's the extent of the information that I have right now. So after having been placed under house arrest, Machar clearly has retaliated, and forces loyal to him have now attacked the military in the capital. That's not good news, obviously. Patrick, you live in the capital, have lived in the capital, I presume, for a long time. I don't know if you were there during the Civil War, but what was it like, and what are you expecting upon hearing that there has been renewed fighting within the capital?
Well, we are seeing a very gloomy picture. I have been here since 2005 in this country. In 2013, when war broke out, I was here. In 2016, when war broke out, I was here. I have seen it all. I have seen people die. I've seen lots. And just like many South Sudanese, we've seen lots of bad things in this country that come as a result of war. And I can tell you that the people of South Sudan are really amazed. People are really, really in a very gloomy mood, because we have seen this. We've seen these things happen, and they keep repeating themselves. And if I can tell you now, the churches, the Muslims have called on the leaders to really, really dialogue. The African Union, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, that is the regional body that mediated the 2018 peace agreement, are calling on the leaders to really sit down and dialogue. And even as we speak, the Kenyan envoy is here, Kenyan special envoy, Raila Odinga, is in Juba also to talk to the leaders to really, really, really dialogue. But we are not seeing movement towards that direction. And we continue to hear of attacks and attacks and attacks. And we are very worried, and everybody in South Sudan is worried. I can tell you, many people report to work late these days. They go home early. Most schools are actually almost empty. People are not taking their children to school because people are thinking that any time clashes will break out because of this continuous detention of Vice President Riek Machar, and he continues to, of course, be detained. His party has also spoken just a minute before we came on air. They were also demanding that he be released. They say the peace agreement can only be served if Riek Machar is released, but the situation in Juba is really gloomy. People are very, very worried. People are very, very scared.
Yeah, and his political party, the main opposition party, SPLM-IO, put out a statement earlier saying that they felt after his arrest that amounted to an abrogation of the 2018 peace accord. Daniel, Patrick mentioned mediation efforts, so I want to ask you about that. Two efforts right now, I think two of the headline mediation efforts. One is that Kenya, the Kenyan president, has sent the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, who is now in Juba as we speak, as his envoy to try and mediate this crisis. And the African Union is expected to send what they call a panel of the wise. That is 5 African personalities. We don't know yet who. I don't know who is on this panel, who are also expected to play into mediation efforts. Do you expect anything in this space?
Well, thanks for the question. It's actually a positive move because in Juba, the communication between the president and Vice President Machar has been disrupted. They are no longer directly communicating in the last few days. So if you have someone like Raila Odinga, who is respected by both of the leaders in Juba because he has been in this space for a very long time, this could be a positive thing. The same with the African Union, maybe the IGAD would do something as well. The presence of regional leaders in Juba is badly needed. It looks like it could be a bit late because it should have been a little bit earlier, as we are seeing now clashes, the spread of violence is much rooming, has happened already in 3 states, and it could actually spill over to other states as well. So this is a positive move, but we don't know what the leaders would do because they have been called by regional leaders to de-escalate. But what we have been seeing is just escalation after escalation. So it might get to the point where it could no longer be put out, the fire that has been burning throughout the country.
Abdullahi, what about peacekeeping? There is a UN peacekeeping force present in South Sudan.
If I may just come in.
Go ahead.
If I may just come in. Yeah, look, there have been a lot of efforts. And why many people in South Sudan are disappointed is because the leaders are saying one thing and on the ground something else is happening. For example, President Salva Kiir declared actually ceasefire. But we've had reports of, confrontations between the forces. And not only that, we've also seen efforts that are being made by the regional leaders is not being really respected by the government of South Sudan, I can say. For example, the IGAD, the East African Regional Body, on Monday this week, had actually sent a delegation to Juba, and this delegation comprised the foreign minister of Ethiopia with his delegation, the foreign minister of Djibouti with his delegation, and then the Kenya's prime cabinet secretary and the IGAD executive secretary. And I can tell you, the IGAD executive secretary moved from Djibouti to Nairobi. They were supposed to come very early in the morning on Monday with the Kenyan delegation, and then the Djibouti team moved from Djibouti and slept in Ethiopia. They were supposed to arrive here also on Monday very early in the morning, and their advance team was already in Juba, who were actually prepared to receive them as media and cover, the stories, only for us to be told at 11 p.m. that has been cancelled and they are coming on 3rd of April. So you can see, and another thing is that the IGAD, when this tension started, immediately the chair of IGAD, who is the president of Djibouti, had to actually convene an extraordinary IGAD summit, which was on South Sudan. But I can tell you that South Sudan did not attend that summit. So we are also seeing that the leaders are kind of not serious about solving the problem of South Sudan. Everybody is putting effort, but we are not seeing enough effort from our leaders. That's just what I wanted to add.
Abdullahi, if mediation for the moment isn't working and it's still early days, what about peacekeeping? There is a UN peacekeeping mission in South Sudan with thousands of troops, armed troops, that have a mandate to use force if need be, amongst other things, to keep the peace and prevent fighting from breaking out. Is that something that you think could contain any emerging conflict?
In theory, it could. Again, but we have to be very skeptical. Like Patrick has alluded to, what we have is a significant, lack of political will, and if you may, even the seriousness to address this issue by the South Sudanese leadership. Absent of any serious leadership, any external intervention, be it peacekeeping, be it regional, or even the UN processes, cannot and will not yield enough to push the country way back from the edge right now that the country is on. But I also would want to make one thing that makes the current situation a little bit difficult is the United Nations receives a significant part of its funding, almost a third, from the United States. There is serious worries that the United States might go through with not giving the United Nations all the money that it needs. Various agencies are already sending people away. There are job cuts and everything that is pertaining to that. We are also living through a process where the UN peacekeeping mission is not regarded as it used to be. Many are arguing that we are entering a new era of UN peacekeeping mission. All this coupled with the fact that the parties do not respect that from time to time, including during this recent crisis, UN peacekeeping officers and compounds have been attacked. So in theory, the UN peacekeeping UNMISS could, but I think in this current situation, what we are seeing is the seriousness of the situation is not matched by the effort that needs to tackle it. So regional leaders need to meet the moment. South Sudanese leadership need to meet the moment. If not, we've seen this movie before, and the people who are going to suffer are ultimately South Sudanese, who many of them now generations, born in war, married in war, and they're having children in war. We are having generations of South Sudanese who know nothing but war. This is a very young country. A lot of people spent blood and treasure to make this country independent, but it is being held hostage by two individuals, and that shouldn't happen.
Abdullahi, I'm glad you mentioned the people of South Sudan, because I can't let the show end without highlighting them. They are the ones who suffer ultimately if another conflict erupts. Daniel, the last civil war forced about a third of the population of South Sudan out of their homes. And, that's obviously, to state the obvious, that's the main reason we hope another round of fighting doesn't erupt, because we're afraid that we could see the same thing. Hundreds of thousands of people killed and millions forced from their homes.
Yes, that is true. And adding to that, it's also when the civil war broke out, the people who were displaced, almost 2.5 million people went to neighboring countries as refugees, and Sudan alone received about 1 million people. Those people had been pushed back into South Sudan by the ongoing civil war in Sudan. And those people actually have arrived at a time when South Sudan is unable to meet its humanitarian emergencies, to address them. So this is also a situation in which South Sudan is in now. It is not ready for another war. So that is also another waiting catastrophe that we could see.
All right, I want to thank all our guests for joining us today. Patrick Oyet in Juba, Daniel Akech, and Abdullahi Halakhe. Thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website. That's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X, our handle there, @AJ Inside Story. From me, Cyril Vanier, and the entire team here in Doha, bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.